In the year 629, the winds of change swept across the arid plains of the Arabian Peninsula, carrying with them the echoes of a confrontation that would forever alter the course of history. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had long sought to extend the message of Islam beyond the confines of Medina. His emissaries ventured into the territories of neighboring empires, bearing letters that invited rulers and tribes to embrace the faith. One such emissary, Al-Harith bin Umayr al-Azdi, was dispatched to the Christian Arab chief of Busra, a region under the influence of the Byzantine Empire. However, upon his arrival, Harith was seized and executed by the orders of the Ghassanid governor, Shurabil ibn Amr. This act of aggression against a messenger of the Prophet was not merely a breach of hospitality, it was a declaration of hostility that could not go unanswered. The news of Harith's martyrdom reached Medina like a thunderclap. The Prophet's heart was heavy with sorrow, yet his resolve was unwavering. He summoned his companions and declared, "Go forth in the name of Allah, and if they refuse, then fight them." With these words, he entrusted the command of the expedition to Zayd ibn Haritha, his beloved companion and adopted son. In the event of Zayd's fall, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and a valiant warrior, was to take command. Should Ja'far also fall, the leadership would pass to Abdullah ibn Rawaha, a poet and strategist whose eloquence inspired courage in the hearts of the faithful. The army that assembled was a formidable force of 3,000 men, a diverse group united by faith and purpose. As they prepared to depart, the Prophet addressed them, offering counsel on conduct and warfare. He emphasized the sanctity of life, the importance of justice, and the need to offer peace before engaging in battle. With these instructions, the army set forth, leaving behind the familiar sands of Medina for the unknown challenges that lay ahead. Their journey took them through the rugged terrains of the Hijaz, across the barren expanses of the desert, and into the fertile lands of the Levant. Along the way, they encountered various tribes and settlements, some of whom offered support, while others remained neutral. The Muslims pressed on, their spirits buoyed by their mission and the hope of spreading the message of Islam. Upon reaching the vicinity of Mu'tah, a village situated near the eastern banks of the Jordan River, the Muslim forces learned of the Ghassanid preparations. Shurabil had not remained idle. He had mobilized his forces and sought reinforcements from the Byzantine Empire. The Muslims found themselves facing an enemy that outnumbered them significantly, yet they were undeterred. They had come not for conquest, but to uphold the honor of their messenger and to stand firm in their faith. The battle commenced with a clash of arms and a storm of arrows. Zayd ibn Haritha led the charge, his banner held high as he urged his men forward. The Ghassanid forces met them with equal ferocity, and the battlefield became a maelstrom of conflict. Zayd fought valiantly, cutting through the enemy ranks until he was struck down by a spear. As he fell, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib took up the banner, rallying the troops with his presence and leadership. He too fought with unmatched bravery, leading from the front until he was martyred, his arms severed in the heat of battle. Abdullah ibn Rawaha then assumed command, his poetic verses inspiring the soldiers to press on. However, he too was martyred, leaving the army without its appointed leaders. In the face of such overwhelming odds, the Muslims found themselves at a crossroads. The prospect of annihilation loomed large. Yet, in this moment of despair, Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as the Sword of Allah, emerged. A seasoned warrior with a reputation for strategic brilliance, Khalid took command of the remaining forces. He assessed the situation swiftly and devised a plan to extricate the army from the encirclement. Under his leadership, the Muslims executed a tactical retreat, preserving their strength and ensuring the survival of the core of their forces. The aftermath of the battle was a mixture of sorrow and reflection. The Muslims had suffered significant losses, but they had also demonstrated unparalleled courage and commitment. The Prophet Muhammad, upon receiving the news of the martyrs' sacrifices, expressed his grief and pride. He spoke of the yearning of the lover for the beloved, a sentiment that resonated deeply with all who heard it. The Battle of Mu'tah, though a military setback, was a testament to the resilience and faith of the early Muslim community. It marked the first direct confrontation between the Muslims and the Byzantine Empire, setting the stage for future engagements. The lessons learned from Mu'tah would inform subsequent campaigns, and the legacy of the martyrs would inspire generations to come. In the years that followed, the Muslims continued their efforts to spread the message of Islam. The martyrdom of Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah became a symbol of sacrifice and devotion. Their names were honored and their deeds celebrated as the community sought to emulate their example. The Battle of Mu'tah serves as a poignant reminder of the trials faced by the early Muslims and the unwavering commitment they had to their faith. It underscores the importance of leadership, unity, and perseverance in the face of adversity. And it highlights the enduring power of belief, which can turn the tide even in the most challenging of circumstances. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, we are reminded of the enduring legacy of those who stood firm in their convictions, who faced overwhelming odds with courage, and who laid down their lives in the service of a cause greater than themselves. Their story continues to inspire and resonate, a beacon of hope and determination for all who seek justice, peace, and truth. The desert wind carried whispers of the battle long after the clashing of swords had faded. News of Mu'tah spread swiftly through the Arabian Peninsula, reaching Medina in a mixture of dread and reverence. Families mourned their sons and brothers, yet there was also a quiet pride that resonated among the believers. They understood that Mu'tah was more than a skirmish. It was a crucible that tested their faith and their commitment to the cause of Islam. Every detail of the confrontation, the bravery of Zayd, the steadfast courage of Jafar, and the eloquent heroism of Abdullah was etched into the collective memory of the community. The battlefield itself became hallowed ground, a symbol of sacrifice and divine favor intertwined. Khalid ibn al-Walid, as tactical acumen, had turned a near-certain catastrophe into a story of survival against impossible odds. His command during the retreat was precise, calculated, and decisive. The Muslims moved in disciplined formations, maintaining their cohesion despite the relentless pressure from the vastly superior Ghassanid and Byzantine forces. Khalid employed classic desert warfare strategies, feigned retreats, sudden charges, and flanking maneuvers that kept the enemy off balance. The Muslim forces, though heavily outnumbered, demonstrated a level of discipline and coordination that astonished the Byzantines. Each movement was a testament to the training, faith, and leadership instilled in them, and it was this combination that allowed the survivors to return to Medina with their dignity intact. Upon their return, the Prophet Muhammad received them not with anger or reproach, but with profound compassion and understanding. He mourned the martyrs openly, recognizing the magnitude of their sacrifice, yet he also reinforced the principles of courage and steadfastness. He recounted how each man had fought not for personal gain or glory, but for the sake of faith, for the protection of a message greater than themselves. In doing so, he framed the battle not as a defeat, but as a defining moment of honor, courage, and divine purpose. This perspective galvanized the community, embedding within them the concept that true victory was not measured solely in numbers or territory, but in faithfulness, resilience, and moral conviction. Meanwhile, the Byzantine and Ghassanid leaders misjudged the significance of Mu'tah. They counted their overwhelming numerical advantage as an absolute guarantee of dominance. Yet they had underestimated the resolve, strategy, and spiritual fervor of their opponents. The encounter planted seeds of respect, fear, and caution in the minds of those empires. They realized that the Muslim forces, though small in number, could not be dismissed lightly. Mu'tah became a prelude to future confrontations along the borders of Byzantine-controlled territories, a signal that the nascent Islamic community could assert itself even in the face of formidable empires. The martyrs themselves became immortalized in the oral and written histories of Islam. Tales of their bravery spread across Arabia, each retelling highlighting acts of heroism that bordered on the mythic. Zayd, with his unwavering charge into the heart of the enemy Jafar, who held the banner even as his arms were severed, and Abdullah, whose words inspired courage even as death approached, became symbols not only of martial valor, but of spiritual devotion. The story of Mu'tah transcended mere military history. It became a moral and inspirational narrative, a touchstone for generations seeking to understand the intersection of faith, duty, and courage. In examining the broader implications of Mu'tah, it becomes clear that the battle had profound strategic significance. While the Muslims did not conquer the Ghassanid territories or seize Byzantine forts, they established a psychological and tactical foothold. The encounter demonstrated that the Muslim forces were willing and able to engage one of the most formidable military powers of the era. It showed the importance of leadership succession and the resilience of disciplined units, and it underscored the potential of faith as a motivating and unifying force in the theater of war. Khalid's leadership in the aftermath ensured that the community retained its strength and morale, setting a precedent for future campaigns that would eventually expand the reach of Islam far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Beyond the battlefield, Mu'tah also shaped the ethical and theological discourse within the Muslim community. The Prophet Muhammad's reflections on the battle emphasized the virtues of patience, courage, and moral integrity, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The narrative of Mu'tah became a lens through which future generations could explore questions of sacrifice, divine favor, and the moral imperatives of leadership. It established a template for understanding warfare, not just as a contest of arms, but as a crucible of character and conviction, where the courage of the soul mattered as much as the skill of the hand. The echoes of Mu'tah would resonate long after the dust of battle settled. Tribes that had once been indifferent or hostile began to reassess the rising power of the Muslims. The psychological impact of a small, determined force standing against a numerically superior army reverberated across the region, contributing to shifts in alliances and attitudes that would shape the next decades of Arabian and Byzantine interactions. While the immediate aftermath was marked by grief and reflection, the long-term consequences were unmistakable. Mu'tah had announced the arrival of a new power, one rooted not in sheer numbers, but in unity, strategy, and unwavering belief. As the community of believers honored their martyrs and internalized the lessons of the battlefield, the story of Mu'tah became more than history. It became legend, a narrative of courage and faith that would inspire poets, historians, and leaders for centuries to come. The battle demonstrated that even against overwhelming odds, conviction, preparation, and leadership could tilt the scales. It revealed the profound human capacity for bravery in defense of ideals and for strategic genius in moments of crisis. And it reminded all who heard the tale that true legacy is forged not by the size of one's army, but by the magnitude of one's spirit and purpose. The Battle of Mu'tah, in its intensity, its heroism, and its lessons, remains a defining chapter in the story of early Islam. Its martyrs are remembered, its strategies analyzed, and its moral and spiritual dimensions contemplated. The confrontation between 3,000 devoted men and 200,000 experienced troops was more than a clash of armies. It was a collision of ideals, a proving ground for faith and leadership, and a moment that forever altered the trajectory of history in the Middle East. In the end, Mu'tah was not a defeat, nor a victory in conventional terms. It was a testament to courage, strategy, and the enduring power of belief against all odds. The surviving Muslim forces, guided by Khalid ibn al-Walid, slowly made their way back toward Medina, each step weighted with loss but strengthened by resilience. Along the dusty roads and through the rugged hills, the men recounted the bravery of their fallen leaders. Zayd's name became synonymous with fearless courage, Ja'far's martyrdom, emblematic of sacrifice for faith, and Abdullah's words, etched in memory, became a source of inspiration for the weary but determined survivors. Every story told along the way became a lesson in loyalty, unity, and the cost of conviction. Though they had faced near annihilation, the army returned not broken but transformed, carrying the spirit of Mu'tah like a living flame. As the news reached Medina, the Prophet Muhammad received the survivors with solemnity and compassion. He mourned deeply for Zayd, Ja'far, and Abdullah, recognizing their heroism and framing their deaths as martyrdom in the eyes of God. He spoke of the martyrs as heroes who had sought nothing for themselves, who had gone forth purely to uphold justice and protect the dignity of Islam. Their sacrifice became a narrative not of defeat, but of honor, a story of men who faced insurmountable odds and held fast to their faith. Families wept, yet they were comforted by the knowledge that their loved ones had attained a revered status that transcended the temporal world. Meanwhile, in the Byzantine court and among the Ghassanid leaders, the reverberations of Mu'tah were keenly felt. Though they had claimed numerical superiority and tactical advantage, the unexpected courage, discipline, and strategic withdrawal of the Muslims had left a lasting impression. The Ghassanids realized that the Muslims were no ordinary adversaries. The Byzantine generals, too, began to see that the emerging Islamic force could not be dismissed as a minor threat. A small, unified, and highly motivated army had demonstrated that it could challenge even the most formidable of imperial powers. Mu'tah thus became a psychological turning point, a moment when the reputation of the Muslims began to spread beyond the Arabian Peninsula, instilling both caution and respect among neighboring powers. The Battle of Mu'tah also left an indelible mark on the soldiers themselves. They had confronted overwhelming odds, witnessed the deaths of their leaders, and yet survived through unity and strategy. The experience transformed them into a more cohesive and battle-hardened force. Khalid ibn al-Walid's leadership during and after the battle became a model of tactical genius for future campaigns. His ability to maintain order, execute a strategic retreat, and preserve the lives of his men against a vastly superior army cemented his reputation as one of the most brilliant commanders in the early Islamic period. The principles demonstrated at Mu'tah, discipline, resilience, and the balance of courage with prudence, would guide future Muslim military endeavors for decades to come. Stories of individual heroism from the battlefield became legends. Accounts described Zayd cutting through enemy lines with unyielding determination, Ja'far holding the banner high despite mortal wounds, and Abdullah using his poetry and eloquence to embolden his comrades in the face of overwhelming terror. Every act became a lesson in moral courage, showing that bravery was not merely physical, but intertwined with spiritual conviction. The men who survived carried these examples with them, transforming their grief into strength and their sorrow into resolve. These narratives traveled beyond Medina, inspiring allies and intimidating adversaries. Even in retreat, the Muslims had achieved a symbolic victory, the proof that true power could manifest not just in numbers, but in faith, unity, and leadership. The larger implications of Mu'tah extended beyond the battlefield. The encounter highlighted the emerging Islamic State's strategic and ethical approach to warfare. The Prophet's instructions emphasized the protection of civilians, the fair treatment of captives, and the pursuit of peace before combat, a framework that contrasted sharply with many contemporary military practices. This ethical grounding, demonstrated even in the midst of a near-catastrophic engagement, elevated the battle from mere military history to a moral exemplar. Mu'tah became a story not only of sacrifice and strategy, but also of principled conduct, a blueprint for how faith could guide action, even in the most brutal circumstances. In the months following the battle, alliances across Arabia shifted subtly. Tribes that had been indifferent or hostile began to re-evaluate their positions. The courage of the Muslims, even in the face of staggering odds, attracted attention and respect. Word of the battle spread along trade routes carried by travelers and merchants, and the legend of Mu'tah began to shape perceptions of the Muslim community. Far from being diminished by their losses, the Muslims had demonstrated the power of moral fortitude and strategic acumen, signaling to the surrounding regions that they were a force capable of profound resilience. As the years passed, the Battle of Mu'tah was studied, retold, and commemorated, not only for its military significance, but for its spiritual and ethical lessons. The names of the martyrs became a touchstone for courage, loyalty, and devotion to faith. Khalid ibn al-Walid's maneuvers became a case study in tactical genius, inspiring generations of commanders. The psychological and political impact of the encounter resonated across the Arabian Peninsula and beyond, influencing interactions with Byzantine allies and local tribes alike. The battle demonstrated that a small, unified, and determined force could project power and influence far beyond its numerical strength, a lesson that would echo throughout the subsequent Muslim expansions. Mu'tah became more than a military engagement. It became a crucible for identity, leadership, and moral courage. It illustrated that the measure of a community's strength is not simply in its numbers, but in its unity, faith, and ability to act decisively under pressure. The early Muslim army had faced an enemy more than 60 times its size, yet through strategy, valor, and spiritual resolve, it survived and imparted a lesson to history. It revealed the enduring human potential for courage, sacrifice, and principled action, even when confronted with seemingly insurmountable challenges. The echoes of this confrontation, both in the stories of the martyrs and in the strategic genius of the survivors, would resonate across centuries, shaping the consciousness of generations to come. The desert sands of Mu'tah would never forget the clashing of swords, the cries of warriors, or the courage of men who faced impossible odds. Though time would erode the physical remnants of the battlefield, the story endured, etched into the collective memory of a people, retold to inspire faith, honor, and unity. The martyrs of Mu'tah, the survivors who carried the lessons of strategy and resilience, and the communities they defended, had together created a legacy that transcended the confines of a single encounter. The battle, though overshadowed by later campaigns in scale, remained a defining moment, a testament to the power of belief, the courage of the human spirit, and the enduring impact of a small force that refused to yield against a mighty empire. As the dust settled over the plains of Mu'tah, the broader political ramifications began to take shape. The Byzantines, who had initially seen the Muslim forces as a minor nuisance, now approached the Arabian frontier with a newfound caution. The Ghassanid vassals, whose confidence had been bolstered by sheer numbers, found themselves facing an adversary whose strength lay not in quantity, but in cohesion, faith, and unyielding resolve. Reports of the battle reached the courts of Damascus and Constantinople, where generals debated the meaning of this encounter. Some viewed the Muslims as a rising threat, a group whose unorthodox methods and unbreakable morale could not be contained through traditional means. Others dismissed the engagement as a minor skirmish, blown out of proportion by the fanaticism of desert tribes. Yet even in skepticism, the psychological seed of respect and fear had been planted. Back in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad reflected on the lessons of Mu'tah. The battle had revealed the importance of strategic thinking, leadership succession, and moral clarity under fire. While he mourned the martyrs, he also recognized that their deaths were not in vain. Each loss carried a lesson, each act of bravery a story to inspire the living. The Prophet emphasized to his followers that courage, discipline, and faith were as potent as swords and shields in determining the outcome of confrontations. Through sermons and personal counsel, he framed Mu'tah as a spiritual and ethical triumph, a demonstration that the early Muslim community could endure adversity, maintain moral conduct, and stand united even when confronted by overwhelming forces. The surviving warriors returned home transformed. Their experiences at Mu'tah were etched into their very being, shaping how they would approach future campaigns. Khalid ibn al-Walid's tactical brilliance became legendary even among his peers. His ability to assess the battlefield, reorganize a decimated army, and execute a strategic retreat under relentless pressure demonstrated an uncanny combination of intellect, experience, and intuition. Khalid would later use these skills in campaigns across Arabia, Levant, and beyond, and the lessons of Mu'tah remained a foundation for his later triumphs. Stories of individual heroism became the lifeblood of oral history. Zayd ibn Haritha's fearless charge, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib's unwavering grasp of the banner despite mortal wounds, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, its eloquent defiance in the face of death, became more than tales. They became moral templates. Young men were taught to emulate these figures, to understand that bravery was inseparable from ethical and spiritual principles. Even beyond the Arabian Peninsula, news of the battle traveled along trade routes and through emissaries, reaching distant tribes and kingdoms. Mu'tah's reputation as a battle of honor and faith extended the influence of the Muslim community far beyond the immediate military consequences. The battle also reshaped internal dynamics within the Muslim community. Leaders and strategists analyzed every decision, every tactic, and every failure to prepare for future encounters. The Prophet's attention to ethical conduct in warfare, protecting civilians, offering peace before combat, and adhering to principles even under duress, was further emphasized in training and counsel. Mu'tah became a touchstone for how the community could maintain moral integrity even in the midst of existential threats, a lesson that would echo through every military engagement in the years to come. From the Byzantine perspective, Mu'tah raised uncomfortable questions. The empire had long relied on numerical superiority and formal military structures to assert dominance over its peripheries. Yet, against a small, disciplined and highly motivated Muslim force, conventional assumptions no longer held. The Ghassanids, once confident of their vassal status and ability to suppress uprisings, now recognized that their reliance on numbers alone could not guarantee success. Byzantine strategists began reconsidering their approach, both diplomatically and militarily, toward the Arabian tribes. Though they retained territorial control, the battle had demonstrated that the Muslim forces were not a transient threat. They were a rising power capable of influencing the balance of regional authority. In the years following Mu'tah, the early Muslim community continued its expansion through both diplomacy and calculated military engagement. The lessons of Mu'tah, leadership under fire, the cohesion of small units, ethical conduct in warfare, and the motivational power of faith were applied in campaigns that would eventually reshape the political map of Arabia and beyond. The story of Mu'tah, preserved in history's poetry and oral tradition, served as both a cautionary tale for enemies and an inspirational guide for allies. It illustrated that courage and conviction could achieve effects far beyond the immediate battlefield, altering perceptions, influencing political calculations, and fostering a reputation that would precede the army wherever it marched. At the human level, the Battle of Mu'tah left an enduring legacy. Survivors carried both physical and emotional scars, but their experiences became a source of collective memory and identity. The shared ordeal fostered a sense of unity and purpose among the community, a realization that their strength lay not merely in weapons or numbers, but in solidarity, faith, and disciplined action. The names of the martyrs, Zayd, Ja'far, Abdullah, became symbols of ultimate sacrifice, forever intertwined with the spiritual and moral fabric of the early Muslim state. Their stories were recounted to inspire courage in the young, to provide moral exemplars for leaders, and to remind the faithful that principle and conviction could guide even the smallest force to enduring influence. Even centuries later, the echoes of Mu'tah endure. The desert winds still carry tales of the courage displayed on that battlefield, of the banners held high against impossible odds, of the tactical genius that preserved an army facing annihilation. It is remembered not merely as a clash of armies, but as a crucible of faith, leadership, and moral fortitude. In the memory of Mu'tah, the principle endures that true strength emerges not solely from size or weaponry, but from unity, strategic acumen, and the courage of the human spirit. The battle stands as a testament to what can be achieved when conviction drives action, when discipline tempers bravery, and when the smallest of forces can leave an indelible mark upon history. The final march back to Medina was heavy with grief, yet alive with the lessons of survival. The soldiers who returned carried with them not only the memory of the martyrs, but also a profound understanding of the realities of warfare and leadership. Every man who had witnessed Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah face death with courage had absorbed a lesson in resilience that could not be taught in words alone. The desert, which had witnessed the clash of 3,000 devoted warriors against 200,000 seasoned troops, now held a silence that spoke louder than any trumpet or sword. The survivors spoke among themselves of strategy and mistakes, of valor and divine favor, and of the intangible spirit that had allowed them to endure what seemed impossible. Khalid ibn al-Walid, having led the retreat, became the focus of admiration and reverence. His calm presence, sharp strategic mind, and unflinching courage ensured that the Muslims had not only survived, but had preserved their ability to continue the mission of the Prophet. Tales of his maneuvering across the battlefield, repositioning forces under relentless attack, executing tactical withdrawals without descending into chaos, and maintaining morale in the face of devastation, circulated immediately upon their return. These accounts spread far beyond Medina, carried by traders and travelers, creating the early reputation of Khalid as a military genius. The legacy of Mu'tah had thus intertwined with his personal legend, a union of circumstance and capability that would resonate for decades. The Prophet Muhammad received the returning soldiers with a solemn dignity, mourning the martyrs openly while reaffirming the honor and purpose of their mission. He reminded the survivors that their endurance and courage had testified to the power of faith and unity. The narrative of Mu'tah, he emphasized, was not one of defeat, but of divine testing, a measure of courage and obedience under overwhelming trial. Every lesson from the battlefield, succession of command, loyalty, tactical acumen, and spiritual steadfastness, was integrated into the teachings he imparted to his community. The event became a cornerstone of identity for the early Muslims, symbolizing the principle that moral and spiritual victories often outweigh the outcomes measured merely by numbers or territory. In Byzantine and Ghassanid lands, the aftermath of Mu'tah induced a mixture of relief and caution. While the Muslims had retreated, their ability to hold their own against such overwhelming odds could not be ignored. Byzantine officials began to reassess the threat posed by the Arabian tribes under the banner of Islam. Reports of the courage and cohesion displayed by the Muslim forces challenged conventional military assumptions and hinted at a rising power that would eventually demand more strategic consideration. Mu'tah, although a tactical withdrawal for the Muslims, had sown the seeds of respect, uncertainty, and anticipation among neighboring empires, an acknowledgement that the small desert army could shape the broader geopolitical landscape in ways disproportionate to its numbers. The stories of individual heroism became immortalized in poetry, oral histories, and teachings. Zayd ibn Haritha's fearless charge, Jafar ibn Abi Talib's defiance as he held the banner despite grievous wounds, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha's inspiring words before his martyrdom transcended the battlefield to become ethical and spiritual lessons. These narratives reinforce the ideal that courage intertwined with moral and religious commitment could inspire generations. Young warriors were taught that heroism was not solely a matter of physical prowess, but of conviction, resilience, and ethical leadership. The sacrifices at Mu'tah became a lens through which the community measured its principles and tested its faith, ensuring that the memory of the battle would resonate far beyond the immediate context of the fight. Over time, the strategic and psychological impact of Mu'tah became even more evident. The engagement served as a training ground, teaching lessons about leadership succession, small unit tactics, and maintaining cohesion under pressure. Khalid ibn al-Walid's brilliance in preserving the army, despite the staggering odds, became a template for future campaigns, influencing the ways in which the Muslim forces conducted warfare in the Levant and beyond. At the same time, the event underscored the importance of maintaining morale and the spiritual strength of an army, lessons that would echo in every subsequent encounter with larger and more organized imperial forces. Politically, Mu'tah altered the perception of the Muslim community throughout Arabia and neighboring territories. Tribes and leaders who had been indifferent or hostile began to approach relations with the Muslims with caution and respect. The battle demonstrated that the Muslims could not be underestimated. Even a small, disciplined and determined force could confront overwhelming odds and endure. This reputation of invincibility in principle, if not in immediate tactical victory, became a tool of diplomacy and influence, extending the reach of the Muslim community without the necessity of conquest. The battlefield itself, though left behind, became hallowed in memory. Every dune and ridge where men had fallen was recounted with reverence, every act of heroism celebrated as an example of human courage aligned with divine purpose. Mu'tah had transformed from a military confrontation into a spiritual and ethical narrative. A story told not only to remember loss, but to instill inspiration, courage, and a sense of purpose. It became a legend, illustrating that even in retreat, valor and wisdom could secure victory in the hearts and minds of people far beyond the immediate battlefield. As the sun set over the plains of Mu'tah, the surviving warriors, families and communities reflected on the profound significance of what had transpired. The battle was no longer merely a fight for honor or retaliation. It had become a defining moment for the early Islamic State. It demonstrated the importance of ethical conduct, leadership under duress, strategic acumen, and unwavering faith. The legacy of Mu'tah was etched into the fabric of history as a testament to what a small but disciplined, unified, and devoted force could achieve. Through courage, sacrifice, and steadfast belief, the Muslims had shown that the measure of strength is not only counted in numbers or weapons, but in unity, purpose, and conviction. The echoes of Mu'tah continued to shape the course of events for years to come. The names of the martyrs were enshrined in memory, their deeds studied as models of heroism and faith. Khalid ibn al-Walid's genius became a standard for commanders, inspiring tactics and strategy in future campaigns that would ultimately reshape the Middle East. Tribes and empires learned to recognize the combination of discipline, moral fortitude, and spiritual zeal as forces capable of extraordinary outcomes. The story of 3,000 brave men standing against 200,000 became an enduring legend, a testament to resilience, leadership, and the power of belief. As the months passed after Mu'tah, the battlefield's echoes continued to reverberate through the Arabian Peninsula. Survivors returned to their families carrying not only tales of grief, but of extraordinary resilience. Each soldier bore the memory of comrades fallen in the sand, of banners held high amid carnage, and of Khalid ibn al-Walid's unshakable command that had preserved the army from total annihilation. Villages and towns listened intently as these stories spread, and the names of Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah became immortalized as paragons of sacrifice and faith. Even those who had never been near the battlefield understood that the events of Mu'tah were shaping the identity of the early Muslim community. Khalid, now a rising legend, was often sought for counsel by both seasoned warriors and the young aspirants of Medina. He meticulously debriefed the survivors, analyzing every maneuver and choice made on the battlefield. These discussions became lessons in both strategy and ethics. Khalid emphasized that victory was not measured solely in casualties inflicted, but in the ability to preserve forces, maintain morale, and uphold justice, even in the midst of war. The strategic withdrawal at Mu'tah became a case study, showing that a smaller, disciplined, and cohesive force could survive against a far superior enemy when guided by tactical brilliance and moral resolve. Meanwhile, the Prophet Muhammad continued to emphasize the spiritual significance of the battle. He reminded the community that martyrs are honored not only for the blood they shed, but for the principles they upheld. In sermons, he recounted how each commander had acted with unwavering courage, how Zayd had led the charge fearlessly, how Jafar had held the banner as his arms were severed, and how Abdullah had inspired the troops with words that lifted hearts even in the face of death. Through these retellings, the memory of Mu'tah was transformed into a moral compass for the community, a story of faith, unity, and leadership under trial. Across the region, the Byzantines and Ghassanids could not ignore the psychological and strategic impact of the battle. Despite their numerical advantage, the Muslim forces had inflicted a sense of respect and fear through sheer determination and tactical discipline. Byzantine commanders began reassessing the nature of the threat posed by the Muslims, recognizing that even small forces could challenge imperial might when motivated by conviction and unity. The Ghassanid vassals, who had once considered the desert tribes manageable, now approached relations with caution. Mu'tah had demonstrated that the Muslims were capable of resilience, strategic thought, and ethical conduct, making them both an unpredictable and formidable opponent. On a human level, the battle left scars that were both visible and invisible. Survivors grappled with the loss of comrades and leaders, yet these hardships forged a stronger sense of camaraderie and identity. Every retelling of heroism became an opportunity for reflection, instilling in the living a recognition that courage is inseparable from principle and faith. Young men, inspired by the stories of Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah, learned that heroism could manifest not only through acts of physical bravery, but through steadfastness in belief and unwavering commitment to a cause greater than oneself. The military lessons of Mu'tah also shaped future campaigns. The Prophet's emphasis on ethical conduct, combined with Khalid's tactical ingenuity, became a model for subsequent engagements with larger and more organized forces. Strategic withdrawals, disciplined formations, and the protection of civilians were incorporated into planning, establishing a precedent for a conduct of warfare that balanced moral imperatives with military necessity. The battle demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the integration of strategy, discipline, and ethical guidance could produce outcomes that preserved both life and honor. Over time, Mu'tah became enshrined in the collective memory, not merely as a military encounter, but as a defining moral and spiritual event. The martyrs' sacrifices were commemorated in poetry, in teachings, and in communal memory, ensuring that each generation would understand the depth of courage and conviction displayed on that fateful day. The battlefield itself, though largely reclaimed by the desert sands, existed forever in the stories and hearts of the people, a reminder that heroism and sacrifice can transcend the limitations of physical terrain and leave an indelible mark on history. Mu'tah's legacy extended beyond immediate military consequences. It influenced diplomacy, reshaped perceptions of the Muslim community, and sent ripples through the politics of the Levant. Tribes and kingdoms reassessed alliances and strategies, realizing that the small, unified and determined Muslim force could exert influence disproportionate to its size. The battle became both a cautionary tale for adversaries and an inspirational narrative for allies. Even in retreat, the Muslims had demonstrated that courage, faith and strategic wisdom could achieve a moral and psychological victory that outlasted the clash of swords. As the years unfolded, Mu'tah continued to serve as a symbol of the enduring power of unity, discipline and belief. The names of Zayd, Ja'far and Abdullah became inseparable from the ideals they embodied: sacrifice, courage and steadfast faith. Khalid ibn al-Walid's tactical genius was celebrated and emulated, influencing campaigns that would ultimately reshape the Middle East. The battle, though overshadowed in immediate military terms, became a foundational narrative for the community, illustrating that true strength is measured not only in numbers, but in the conviction and cohesion of those who stand together for a cause. The plains of Mu'tah, once a site of slaughter and valor, now stood as a testament to what is possible when faith and strategy intersect. The desert carried the memory of 3,000 men who had faced 200,000, of leaders who fell yet inspired countless more, and of a small community whose courage and conviction reverberated far beyond its borders. The story of Mu'tah endured not as a tale of loss, but as an epic of survival, heroism, and the unyielding power of belief. It remained a lesson to all who would hear it, that unity, moral courage, and strategic wisdom can turn even the most daunting odds into enduring legacy. The final chapter of the story begins in the aftermath, as the echoes of clashing swords and cries of warriors fade into memory, leaving the desert winds to carry their silent testament. The battlefield of Mu'tah had been claimed once again by the shifting sands, yet the lives lost, the bravery displayed, and the lessons learned lingered as living forces, shaping the very fabric of the emerging Muslim community. Survivors returned to Medina transformed, their faces etched with grief, their hearts heavy yet resolute. Each carried the memory of fallen comrades, of Zayd charging fearlessly into the enemy, Ja'far holding the banner high, even as his arms were severed, and Abdullah inspiring the troops with words that lifted their courage despite the looming shadow of death. Khalid ibn al-Walid, now more than ever, embodied both the tactical genius and the steady hand that had saved the army from annihilation. He meticulously reconstructed the narratives of the battle, ensuring every maneuver, every decision, and every sacrifice was understood. To the soldiers, he was a mentor and a strategist. To the community, he was the living testament to the power of discipline and intellect married to faith. Under his guidance, the lessons of Mu'tah became codified into principles that would inform every future military engagement, laying the groundwork for campaigns that would extend the influence of Islam far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Meanwhile, the Prophet Muhammad spoke of the battle not merely as a conflict of arms, but as a spiritual and ethical crucible. He reminded his followers that the martyrs had fought not for conquest or wealth, but for the dignity of their message and the sanctity of justice. Each death was honored as a testament to faith, courage, and loyalty. The Prophet's words framed the battle as a triumph of principle over circumstance, of moral strength over numerical superiority. The story of Mu'tah became a moral compass, teaching that courage and conviction could endure beyond the battlefield, shaping the identity and values of a community for generations to come. The ripples of Mu'tah extended beyond the immediate participants. Byzantine and Ghassanid leaders, who had initially relied on numerical superiority, found themselves confronting a force that could not be measured merely by size. Reports of the Muslims' courage, cohesion, and tactical acumen traveled across courts and trading routes, forcing a re-evaluation of the political landscape. Even in retreat, the Muslim army had established a reputation that would influence diplomacy, alliances, and military strategy for years to come. Mu'tah had shown that a small, disciplined, and resolute force could wield influence far beyond its apparent strength. a lesson that would echo in the engagements and conquests that followed. On a personal level, the battle transformed the surviving soldiers and the wider community. The trauma of loss was intertwined with pride in the deeds of the martyrs and gratitude for their own survival. Each retelling of the battle emphasized the bravery, loyalty, and ethical conduct displayed, reinforcing the ideals that would guide the early Muslim state. Children grew up hearing the stories of Zayd, Jafar, and Abdullah, learning that true heroism combined courage with moral and spiritual integrity. The soldiers themselves became living embodiments of the lessons learned: resilience, unity, and unwavering faith in the face of overwhelming adversity. Strategically, Mu'tah had been a proving ground. Khalid ibn al-Walid's management of the retreat demonstrated the importance of leadership, foresight, and adaptability. Every movement on the battlefield, every feigned withdrawal, and every reformation of lines became a textbook example of desert warfare and tactical ingenuity. These principles were carried into subsequent engagements, enabling the Muslim forces to confront larger and more formidable armies with confidence and discipline. The encounter at Mu'tah became a template for balancing boldness with prudence, courage with ethics, and strategy with faith. As years passed, the legacy of Mu'tah was preserved in memory, in poetry, and in chronicles. It transcended the confines of a single battle to become a symbol of moral courage, strategic wisdom, and spiritual dedication. The names of the martyrs were honored, their deeds studied, and their sacrifices celebrated. Khalid's genius was remembered and emulated, his example providing guidance to leaders for generations. The psychological impact of the encounter continued to resonate in Byzantine, Ghassanid, and Arabian politics, shaping interactions and influencing perceptions of the Muslim community as a rising power grounded in faith and discipline. Finally, the desert itself seemed to remember. The sands of Mu'tah, ever shifting and eternal, carried the silent testimony of bravery and sacrifice. The banners that had once flown high, the cries that had pierced the air, and the courage displayed against impossible odds were all absorbed into the very essence of the land. The battle became legend, a testament to the enduring human spirit, the power of unity, and the capacity of belief to transform the smallest of forces into something that could challenge empires. The story of 3,000 against 200,000 endured not as a tale of loss, but as a cinematic epic of courage, leadership, and faith, a story that continues to inspire awe and reflection centuries later. The saga of Mu'tah closes with a simple truth: that heroism is measured not by numbers or conquest alone, but by conviction, courage, and the enduring legacy of those who stand unwavering when faced with the impossible. It is in this crucible of sand, blood, and faith that the early Muslim community forged its identity, leaving a mark on history that resonates to this day.